Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Weikle, and today I'm going to be talking a little bit about legacy protocols that we have in our modern world. Many of you probably are working with organizations that have tens of 20 years of historical technology and protocols that have been put in place that contain a lot of business value that really helps to support your organization for the initiatives that they want to support their customer base. And taking a forklift in and moving things out is going to be something that's not quite so easy to do. So with that being said, how can you move into a modern world while you're still supporting these legacy protocols? So we're going to do a little deep dive into this today. So welcome to Kong Summit 2021. As I mentioned, my name is Aaron Weikle. Excited to have you here for our talk, and we're going to dive into some more of these legacy protocols. So who am I? So founder and CEO of MS3, but I'm not your standard, businessy kind of CEO. I'm actually a hands-on engineer. I received a master's degree in software engineering from WVU, which is actually a top 50 engineering school in the world. I've acted as an enterprise architect for the U.S. Department of State, where we've been able to save, tens of millions of dollars for taxpayers of taxpayer money in modernization, moving legacy into APIs. I was an API architect for Chick-fil-A, where we were able to really bring you those chicken sandwiches and those hot French fries, and why everyone wants to go to Chick-fil-A because they got the fastest drive-through, especially in a pandemic world. I was a strategic architect for McDonald's as they were trying to go through a modernization of their legacy systems that have been around for 10 or 20 years. Strategic advisor for Harvard University, where they were looking to provide an enterprise integration platform that could support their entire organization. And then most recently, I am the platform architect for the U.S. Department of Navy, helping them to channel your financial dollars, taxpayer dollars, to the organization within the Navy. So let's take a little quick dive through the history of integration. Integration has been, around for quite a while, actually all the way back to 1972. Whenever DARPA actually created what was called ARPANET. ARPANET was where they did interconnectivity from universities to be able to share information across the country that universities are doing. This was really the start of interconnectivity, right? Where we are today, where we're talking about interconnected platforms and communication. So as that began to evolve, right, we started to adopt this with network topology, using things like token rings and stars and mesh networks in order to help to bring more interconnectivity into our world of computing and processing. Then we needed to standardize because there was more and more. So we started the RFC organization where we're standardizing on IPs and TCPs and UDPs and HTTPs and all these different ways for communicating across the wire, slowly moving up the OSI stack to the application. And what are we left with? Now we're at the implementation layer, right? And this is where things start to get really hairy. And this is what we're going to dive mostly into today is the implementation. As you know, we have RMI, we have SOAP, we have REST, we have gRPC, and these protocols are really at the application layer that's running over things like HTTP2 or HTTP 1.1 and those protocols that were defined in the previous slide. But what does that give you today? It gives you a lot of confusion because organizations have applications that are communicating in different means and measures. And because of that, it makes it really hard to be able to communicate from a modern SaaS application to a legacy backend that may be on a mainframe or maybe on an iSeries server, something along those lines. So it gets really confusing. And these protocols are continuing to evolve. You have things like Kafka coming in, you have gRPC and proto-buffing that's using the HTTP2 streaming. And how do you really get a SOAP service to be able to talk to consumers that want gRPC? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about that. So how can we support legacy while still modernizing? Now, This is a 25-minute session. I'm going to be throwing a lot of stuff at you really, really quickly because this is a very broad topic. And so we're going to keep it, narrow and focused and talk a little bit about what we can do here. And I'm going to talk about some of my favorites that, approaches and strategies, because I've seen a lot of legacy through the years, and being able to modernize is something that we have become very, very good at. So how do you do it? Well, with patterns, right? You see a lot of organizations out there, the big iron shops, that love to say, oh, you want to integrate, here's my big iron solution, it's going to save the world, right? But that's not the case. Integration is more of an artistic approach for API enablement and consumption than it is about the technology. Applying the patterns for these things is very important in order to make sure that your consumers have the necessary means to get to the business value and function that your systems need to expose. And it may not even be a third-party consumer. It could be your internal businesses. Let's look at banks. Banks need to process money, and they have hundreds or thousands of branches that are out there, and you have a centralized data center. That information has to communicate back and forth. So you need to address modernization with patterns. So some of you have maybe heard of the strangler pattern, right? This is the telltale strangler from SpongeBob SquarePants. The strangler pattern is actually a pattern that was formulated or really depicted by Martin Fowler. Many of you probably have seen him. He's very big in microservices. And this is a great strategy for modernization. But it's not quite my favorite. My favorite is the mullet pattern, right? Mullets are fun party in the front, business in the back, or business in the front, party in the back. And so with that being said, we're going to walk through these two specific patterns and how they can be applied in a Kong world, because it's really important to understand how to do the application of this in a Kong tool set. So first off, we went through the process and we used Kong's extensible plugin framework and have created what we call the SOAP support toolkit. Now, there are other toolkits that we've created, but we'll focus predominantly on SOAP today instead of going into like B2B or EDI, things of that nature. What does that entail? It's a WSDL DAO, the ability for Kong to be able to ingest a WSDL from a backend service and be able to persist the metadata associated with it for your consumers to be able to get access to. The WSDL provider, it's a add-on plugin that will allow the provider to consume the DAO objects and serve that up. As you can imagine, most of your services, especially if you're providing to third parties, will be outside and inside of the firewall. So your third party doesn't have the ability for an import statement to go to your server that's inside the firewall. So we had to create a DAO and a provider to be able to address that. That will then do a transformation of those import URLs away from the backend server into the API gateway, so that way that your automated services can consume that information and be able to generate the stubs. SOAP request validator. As you can imagine, SOAP coming in, it's best to identify where the issues are early in the stack. So we validate the SOAP action. We validate the data model to make sure that it can go through. We also have the ability to handle the responses coming back. So problem that we have with legacy is they like to send big, nasty stack traces that could have sensitive information. This SOAP response handler that we've created has the ability to obfuscate that and be able to provide a nice, clean, sane response message to your consumers to contact support. We've created a mullet plugin, right? So as we'll dive a little bit further in, the mullet pattern is a very helpful legacy modernization type of tool. And then lastly, the Data Sonnet Transformer, which is an extremely powerful template-based transformation language written on Scala that originated from powerhouses like Google and Databricks. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. So the mullet pattern. This is one of my favorites because it gives you the fastest time to modernization without putting a lot of strain on your legacy systems and your legacy developers. So it is designed for an API-led digital transformation. Organizations want to go API-led because it provides modularity, interconnectivity, and standardization. So this pattern really enables you to get there in a much faster manner. It also provides a nice clean API on the front end while hiding that messy back end that's on the back side. You can apply a mullet pattern for SOAP service, which we'll talk about today, or you can do it for some of the other protocols, FTP. You can also do it for EDI and B2B communications, those types of things, right? So it's a great pattern. They generally live for short periods of time. You don't want to persist a mullet pattern for perpetuity because you do want to modernize those backend systems. And the mullet pattern is something that is very accessible within Kong. So how do you do that implementation with Kong? Well, let's start out. We have a mobile application. We all know that mobile loves APIs, getting JSON data back so that way that it can evaluate it and make the functionality on the screen to be very fluid and have a great user interface. But you have a legacy SOAP backend, right? So how do we really get this to communicate? Sure, mobile applications have toolkits to be able to consume SOAP, but it's really not a good approach because of how heavy the XML can be and all the additional libraries that the mobile application needs to have. So it becomes very confusing and very time expensive, and it can exceed the memory utilization footprint of the mobile device. So what do? Well, that's where Kong comes in, right? And the mullet pattern. So we have the ability for Kong to be able to serve up and broker, providing a layer of abstraction to that SOAP service. So that way that your backend service can still provide that amazing business value. Oops, I went the wrong way. And it can expose that API to your mobile application, which then turns into revenue and success for your organization. So this is how Kong can implement the mullet pattern successfully to be able to make your modernization of your legacy protocols without forcing them to go down, a path of, objection because they have 10,000 other #1 priorities than to convert their SOAP over into an API. So under the cover, what does the mullet, really doing? Well, APIs have HTTP methods. They have gets, posts, puts, deletes, patches. These are then mapped to a SOAP action and a data model because, as you know, with a SOAP, everything is a post and everything has a SOAP action. Most things have a SOAP action, and it has a dedicated data model for each one of these SOAP actions. So how do we convert that JSON payload over into the XML SOAP that's needed? Well, that's Data Sonnet. Data Sonnet, as I mentioned, is an open source, powerful transformation language that's written on Scala that can help to do these transformations. It too has a plugin using the extensible plugin framework that Kong offers in order to apply these data transformations. So what does Data Sonnet look like? It looks like this, right? You have here on the left your payload. You have a nice template-based transformation, very similar to XSLTs, or if you're a MuleSoft, to this, and it converts it over into your XML. That way that your SOAP service can consume it, and it's all compliant. The best thing about this is data validation is baked in, so that way if there is a problem or there is an error, it's caught early in the stack, and the communication can go back to the end customer. Strangler facade. So this is a broader strategy than a singular API. This is a organizational strategy that takes the mullet pattern and other strategies in account and makes it very successful. So this is what Martin Fowler had talked about. So he had went to, I think South American, or maybe it was New Zealand. You can go read it on his webpage, but he went to another country and he saw the strangler fig. And how the strangler fig did is it would grow and it would choke off the existing tree and then become a tree itself. So that's exactly what we're looking to do with the strangler facade in a migration strategy. But the facade is disposable pieces of API or API proxies that we can expose and then throw away as the systems underneath become modernized. So what does that look like? It's easy pattern, right? It could be file-based delivery. It could be batch-based polling scenarios. Many of these things are legacy style architectures. And if you want to move into event-driven messaging, the facade layer will help you to go in that direction for your consumers while you're starting to modernize your system. the legacy functionality begins to shrink, right? And your modern designs are being implemented in a new approach. And the facade actually has two sides, right? Initially, when you implement it, you're facading out the legacy capability on the new technology. But as your consumers start to adopt the new approach, which is generally faster than what your back-end legacy systems can be modernized, they then start to switch over to the modern system. You avoid technical debt, right? Because you have a very thin layer of abstraction that is providing the interconnectivity from the legacy system to the modern system. And you can really take some really good DevOps strategies here, where you can do things like canary releases or split deployments, so that way that you can make sure that the new functionality is there without impacting your broader business as a whole. So once you've completed the modernization, now you have the ability to remove the legacy system. All your consumers and producers are using the new system. You've reduced your O&M costs, and you've accelerated business functions. Something that has been reported year over year for the past 3 to 5 years in many other integration technology stacks is that the CTO and CIO of organizations are spending 70% of their budgets just on maintaining legacy systems. Right? Now, legacy doesn't ever go away, because what's modern today becomes legacy tomorrow. So these patterns are reusable. You can continue to take this approach on and on and on while continuing to drive innovation and strategy for your organization. So what does that implementation look like in Kong? So you have your SOAP service, and you're wanting to expose that via Kong. We talked about the WSDL DAO, the WSDL provider. We have our consumer, he's consuming SOAP, everything's happy, hunky-dory, right? Consumer 2 comes along, he can consume SOAP as well. But now consumer 3 comes in, and they're wanting to consume APIs. Well, why create another API on the back end for this one consumer when you can implement the mullet pattern, where the SOAP is still the same SOAP service, you've just created the API rendition of that for consumers to be able to consume. But now your organization is starting to modernize, and you want to go with RESTful-based protocols, so that way that you can use the more modern technologies and approaches and strategies. So you can expose that API through Kong, just like Kong is designed to do, and your consumer 4 is now able to consume API from your REST services and your SOAP services. So as your consumers start to modernize, they start to switch over to APIs as well. Because let's face it, our consumers, let me take a step back. Not all consumers, but many consumers are more agile to consume modern technologies than many of our organizations are to change our business value holding backends. So that being said, they're going to be able to adopt to an API strategy a lot sooner. So that mullet pattern, again, provides you that capability. So then as time goes by, now your organization has the ability to update the REST and make it all API through. And Kong has really brokered that transformational strategy from SOAP legacy protocols into supporting current legacy consumers, next generation API consumers, and then the modernization of the back end without breaking your consumers 1 through 4 that have already modernized into an API approach. Now we have the next generation of things that are coming up, gRPC, right? So exact same pattern, exact same strategy that can go through and be able to be applied through Kong, because Kong supports gRPC, and be able to do the exact same patterns and the exact same segmentation of work between APIs, SOAP, and gRPC without having to do a complete retooling of your tool set. That's the big key here, is that Kong is providing a great layer of abstraction for SOAP, for API, and for gRPC, and they're going to continue to innovate as we move into newer technologies that will be exposed for data consumption and sharing. So in closing, before we move into the last 5 minutes of this presentation, I wanted to say, as I mentioned, legacy never goes away. what is modern today is legacy tomorrow. So it's important to understand that these patterns are things that persist, right? Integration is an art form. It's not about just going out and taking a piece of technology and slapping it down, right? You need to provide with a piece of technology, which is key, that supports multiple protocols and capabilities like Kong does. So as I mentioned in the last slide, supports API, supports SOAP, supports gRPC, has Kafka capabilities, direct tie-ins into service meshing. We now have, as you saw, the release of the Kong Ingress Controller 2.0 that has Prometheus tied in. So a lot of really great capabilities within this platform that's going to help you as you go in this direction of modernization. The patterns will help you. They will get you there without putting undue stress on your legacy consumers or your legacy data providers that hold all the business value. And then again, I am Aaron Weikle. I am the CEO of MS3. We can help get you there, right? It's very important to understand that having a partner that can get you from your legacy into your modernization is key, because we specialize in the identification and application of patterns for large organizations and small organizations as well. So that is the end of this presentation. I do have 4 minutes to go into the Q&A. So we do have some questions that are in here. I don't know if some of you had put anything in here. So lessons learned that you can share is one question that we had. So it's really important to understand is that an API is different for each organization. So it's you have to understand the application. An API for a consumer can be message driven or oriented for one of your clients, or it could be asynchronous for another, or it could be batch for another, right? So having the understanding of the patterns that make these things successful is really key. So learn your patterns for integration and API enablement, because those are the things that never change. What are some of the best practices that you think that we should adopt? Well, first and foremost, using Kong obviously is a very good practice because it is at the forefront of modernization. The second piece there is don't forget about the ancillary capabilities. I heard in one of the conversations in the keynote, they were talking about the ability to use open tracing and open telemetry. It's fantastic that now the 2.0 aspect of the Kong Ingress Controller now ties Prometheus directly into it. So now your observability can be from day one. Don't wait till the last minute to implement your observability, because as you move into that distribution of APIs, it's going to be key for you to have that tracing capability from API to API to API to ensure that you understand what is going on within your organization. It also will reduce your operations time. A consumer says, hey, I have an issue. My bank statement is not returning. You'll be able to go and look at your observability and identify, oh, Johnny forgot his password. That's why he's not able to get in there. Let's see here. What are some other ones? What are some other supported legacy protocols? So we talked about, some of these. So SOAP is probably the biggest gorilla, pardon the pun, in the room, because there's so many services that have adopted SOAP and SOA-based architecture in the late 2000s. Well, those frameworks have now become very old and obsolete because there's modern technologies that's wanting to accelerate innovation. So there's even older ones that are out there that can be used and supported through Kong with these layers of abstraction. I mentioned one of them, being able to do, file movement with FTP, being able to do JMS message drops and using the correlation ID for, pulling the information back. You've probably seen some of these patterns where you send in a request, and Salesforce is very big with this pattern, where you send in a request and they give you a location URL in the header, and you just keep polling it, and you're getting a 404 until it returns back the data. Well, on the back side of that, you can implement that exact same pattern using a JMS broker, AMQP, and using the correlation ID to tie those things together. How crucial is it to be supportive of legacy protocols? Well, that comes down to the business, right? Most businesses, with the exception of a lot of startups and a lot of newer companies, have a lot of their business value baked into those legacy applications, and they're not as agile as what APIs are, microservices are. That's why we've seen a decomposition of monoliths into micro services and APIs. So it's very important to keep those things from a business perspective, especially when you're in a banking or insurance or something that has a lot of your business process and value inside of it exposed, and making that be available for your either internal users or your third party. So at that point, I am getting, notice that time to wrap it up. I hope that this discussion was informative for you. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to go over to our booth, MS3. I'll be over there for additional Q&A. If you have any other questions that you would like to dive into, we'd love to see you over there and chat a little more.